All right, on to the next question. It says, maybe this was covered in a previous webinar session, but study guide question 10 seems to apply more to remote sensing than it does to high precision and error propagation. How does side lap and end lap apply? How much effort should be asserted to this question?
Reference for this study question is a portion out of a book on photogrammetry, and it's basically relating to creating ground control. And you can't really know how to identify or place ground control unless you know how the photography is going to run, because the ground control is situated in certain ways according to the flight lines and the way that the photography is going to be flown. So that's the reason why that type of a question is here. It's the control part of the syllabus item. So loosely speaking, if you're going to have a certain scale of photography, which is then intimately related to the ground elevation and flying height, then you know the frequency of flight lines, and you should then be able, if you know the area that's going to be covered, be able to come up with a reasonable situation for the control points. And once you have those and you know the scale of what's going to be done, you should be able to then figure out how well the control points have to be positioned. That's the reason for having that particular reference in this.
All right, moving along. Next question is from the October 2006 exam, which I'll put up on the screen in a moment. But question 6 states there's a 2-kilometer horizontal drift. So I will just bring that up. Okay, I think I have it here. Dr. Secord stated that plumb lines would be a starting point, but the question states there's a 2-kilometer horizontal drift.
Mm-hmm. My point was, when there was a suggestion of using only a gyrotheodolite on its own, that you wouldn't probably be able to do that. There would have to be traversing and then the gyro observations afterwards. So unless you mentioned how to get started along the drift, saying just gyrotheodolite wouldn't be enough.
Another quick question. What about single point transfer plus gyro observation in the drift?
If you had single point transfer, how would you know the direction to drive the drift to start? So you would need at least 2 points initially to get some idea of what direction to go. If you can imagine yourself 400 meters below the surface with a 4-meter diameter shaft, it would be very difficult to know which direction you would want to go unless you had a couple of plumb lines, at least initially. And you think of it too in the process of driving the shaft and then driving the drift. There's going to be a lot of commotion and material around, and usually that's not conducive to using something of a very high precision like a gyrotheodolite, simply because the conditions are a little too rough. And even if you were able to set it up at the bottom of the shaft and get an orientation without something already, you really wouldn't have much of an orientation. If you think of, say, setting up the gyrotheodolite underneath the plumb line and then using it to get a direction to drive the drift, you already have a sight only of a couple of meters, and then if you're going to be driving the drift, there won't be anywhere to put any target off the site anyway. So it's usually a lot easier to do something mechanically by having a couple of plumb lines and running off those before starting to use the gyrotheodolite. So once you've got maybe a couple of traverse stations, so you're in along the drift a couple 100 meters, then you can start controlling things with azimuth determinations.
All right, on to the next one. When we are attempting to get high precision, cost is not the most important aspect to consider. Should this not be the case in this exam?
I'm not so sure what the question is asking.
I believe it refers back to previously we were talking about the costs of some of the extremely high precision equipment, and that a company might not, that not using it is costing you money.
Well, if you were to look at it in terms of this particular question, where it's a drift as opposed to a tunnel, would suggest then it's mining activity, and generally speaking, the mining activity wouldn't have the same precision requirements as the tunneling for a nuclear accelerator or for, say, a transportation route.
All right. What looks to be a possibly short question here, and forgive me for mangling the name. Will we get full marks for using Chernovsky's formula?
Which one? In the context of what? I mentioned, I believe it was in this one about the geodetic corrections, that there is a rigorous formula that's given in Davis, Foote, Anderson, and McHale for determining the meridian convergence based on the particulars of the ellipsoid. And if you look closely at the say the most recent examination, the particulars of the ellipsoid are given right after the formula. Chernovsky gives in a couple of his papers what he calls a napkin formula that's a little simpler, and it's usable only under certain conditions, certain limit to the amount of horizontal progression and that sort of thing. A napkin formula in the sense that if you were at a dinner discussing things with another engineer and the point came up, then you could just simply scribble something and throw in some numbers and do a calculation in your head, which is fine for a dinner engagement. It's not maybe the best thing to do for an examination. But as I mentioned, in this particular instance, because the conditions were within the assumptions made in this shorter formula, the number that came out was the same within an arcsecond of each other.